It's really nice to hear about that. I think a perception of people entering into group projects is that they hear the negative. They imagine students that are critical of one another who will not work with one another well. And along those lines, could you tell us more about the group exam that you tried, Scott? Because I think that's sort of an unusual technique.
Mm-hmm. So now I've morphed from the way I did it then, because that was, again, using Scantrons and such. I now do it through Learning Analytics. But what I do, and I actually now give them the group exam first, and then they do a different set of questions, not the same set of questions, it's a solo exam later. But I deliver this like a supersized Learning Analytics quiz. It's a full scale, what it would be an exam, and those would, in these large classes, would have been all multiple choice anyway. I do have the freedom to do a few different things in Learning Analytics, but I'm trying to keep it like it was, so it's still all multiple choice. And I tell them they can talk to anyone in the room, they just can't shout out across the room, they can get up and move, and it's kind of interesting, you'll start to see the ambassadors start to go around the room after about 15 minutes into it, so they want to see what other groups have said. But it's a 40-ish question exam in a 50-minute class, 50-ish question exam in an hour and 15-minute class. And they have to be in the class to participate, so I use a code number that they have to get only in the classroom. People do Learning Analytics outside the class. Earlier people asked about distance learning. They actually could do it outside the class, but I keep this where they can't do it outside the class. And then I tell them they have to score within 10 questions of the class average, or they get their own crappy score from below. So they can be above, they're going to get the class average, which the class average has always been high enough to where you couldn't be 10 questions above it. But if you're 10 or more questions below it, then you're going to get that bad score. But you're also going to hurt the class average, so there's an incentive on both ends to communicate. And I've seen the people who tend to try as much as they can never talk get pulled out of their shell by others who are wanting to make sure that they're not going to pull down their average. And at the same time, then they are starting to get, their score is being valued, but also their minds are being valued. They have to be convinced that this is the right answer, and so that I think is beneficial both ways.
So I've been having, I have active classes, I have active recitations, I have active office hours. And so the students go through all these active thing, and so now they want active exams, group exams. So that's not out of the question, so I'm going to have Scott come over and explain to me how he does things so that I can use his model in my active exams.
I'm almost convinced.
I will say, I mean, my structure is that these classes were primarily multiple choice exams, so if you've got a different framework, there are certainly different spins you would put on it based on what you're doing, but still, I think that it's a very useful way of doing it, and yet you also want to make them do it on their own at some point, too, either before or after, so that they get both. But that group exam experience helps them to see it's much more doable, and also maybe wakes them up to what they still need to work on to reach that level.
I think part of what we are working to overcome, and I think it's good that we are, is, in American culture, we're taught to be competitive, rugged individualists, and we're not, at least my generation, we're not encouraged to cooperate with the people that you're competing against. So if we can work against that model, because as I understand it, that's the future of the modern American workplace, the global workplace, is that there's going to be a lot more collaboration. So it's good for us to get our students prepared for that world.
There already are, I mean, it already is a lot of collaboration in the workplace and seeing their fellow students not as competitors.
Right.
But, these are other Auburn students. We can compete against University of Alabama and whatever, but within Auburn, we're not going to compete with each other. If we all get A's, that's great, but you have to earn it.
Right.
Yeah. Everyone is above average.
Like a little gun. We'll have to pay royalties to Garrison Keillor now.
Well, older people are below the median.
So let me ask a general question of y'all. Have any of you ever participated, either given or taken, a group exam? Yeah?
On paper, though, for Scantrons. And, they really liked it. I give them a group grade and an individual grade like you're describing, and at that time I was just average. But I think they learned a lot from each other's thought process on a group exam. They could discuss why I chose this and what were you thinking, and they're more likely to talk to each other than to talk to me.
Yeah.
So I have to write that.
Thank you.
Was that done in class or like a take home?
In class.
In class.
One thing about if you really go to a heavily active learning setup class, yes, it takes more time to do active learning, but since you're putting all that assimilation outside of the class, all that exposure outside of the class is focused on assimilation, doesn't mean they can't assimilate outside, and you can really never get behind in class again, because you have, these are the goals and the materials out there for the students to work with. Now they can get behind, but you can always make sure that you're on pace. If you don't get as much accomplished in the time period of the class, expect them to do some more outside of class.
I do find that my students, once they get used to the people in their group, they want to keep working with these people. They will get together on their own initiative to study for exams and things. So yes, they will. That's what's great about this, is they will take this out beyond the classroom and keep working with it.
It's almost like mini learning communities being built in your classes.
Exactly.
So do y'all keep, the question I'm trying to formulate is sometimes when people work with groups in classes, they make an effort to keep those groups the same through the semester, and sometimes they change them. And I was wondering if you happen to use formal groups in your class, which you do.
I have so far kept my group memberships the same, always willing to change them around if problems arise, and they haven't yet. But I see there may be some value in changing the groups up to. I just haven't done it.
So in our case, there has been research that shows that if you do not change the groups, then the performance goes down. And I have noticed that, and some students, they are now so well acquainted with each other that they want to talk about yesterday's movie that they went all together. So they have finished the worksheet in 20 minutes, and now they're talking about this, and I come along, what happened here? And this is a good group. And so we finished it. I said, but this is not, I can see that this is not correct, and they didn't even look at, give it a second look to see what happened and what went wrong. And so it is recommended that you change after every 2 weeks, at least for us. And so we've been doing that. If the groups are working well, then I didn't see the need to do it, so I haven't done it for one class. But the other class, if the group is disruptive or something like this happens, then we move it around. Even in recitations and labs, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I see the advantage of that. One thing I do to introduce a little variety and maybe circumvent some of that is I will sometimes combine the groups, take two smaller ones and put them together, and that way there's at least some new blood in the conversation.
I generally don't use assigned groups at all. I've tried it a few times, and it's really hard in a large class with just you and an SI leader to make that actually work, and people's attendance not always regular among students. So, but I have done some occasions. I was asked earlier about something that in education speaks usually called jigsaw, where you have groups become experts and then go back and share. So that's the only case where I do somewhat formalized groups, is I will make them, okay, this is the group doing 4 things, and spread them out, and then they have to assemble so that they can teach each other. So, but other than that, I just leave it up to them.
How are you defining large classes? Is 72 large, or? Because in the 72 easel classroom, that's when they have fixed seats, like a dinner table kind of a thing. That's where I change groups. But in the large class, the 240 students class, it's all a fluid thing, and you can. And I have a funny story also, which enables them to go, and if you want to talk to someone you haven't been able to talk to, go and talk to that person now, kind of a way. So they actually have a reason to go and change groups and things like that.
So do you assign the groups, or do they self-select the groups, and what size groups do you have?
So again, in physics, there is research that self-selecting groups is not a good idea. So you assign the groups based on whatever characteristics. Now there are software who will do the grouping for you, and that has worked typically very well. So no random groups and no self-selected groups.
And that's in your easel classroom, or that's
in the easel classroom, yeah. But I haven't followed those rules strictly, but that's the recommendation.
I didn't read that research. My groups are self-selecting on usually the second day of class, although they usually don't know each other, so it's not like they're forming clubs with their friends.
This is physics-specific research, so I cannot speak for outside physics.
Yeah. And you asked about the size. I think in the larger lectures, the larger classes, I beg your pardon, the larger classes, again, depending on the actual physical structure of the room, it's going to have to be a group size of about 10 to 12 people per group, which is not ideal. In the easel classrooms, it's more like, depends on whether it's a literature or and if we count on everybody showing up, maybe six people per group on average.
Yeah.
But with the larger groups, what I would do is re-engineer the question so that it's something that maybe the larger group size could work with. And I think I was being asked earlier, what if they don't all get to present? I could have a class of say 9 groups. If I have 9 rows, about 10 students in each of them, I can have 5 of them present on one day and the other 5 present the next day.
And in our case, we have typically 3 or maximum 4, and everyone's assigned a role. So one is the PI, one is the researcher, one is a skeptic or something, and the roles switch every day or every week. And so if one of them is going to present, then that person also changes, and it keeps everyone on track. Thinking, did you do your job, or did you do your job?
So students know what to expect.
Yes, predefined jobs per group.
So, yes.
If we have large size class, right, like 400 or like 600, and we don't have clickers, what is the best way to take